Hey there, and welcome. If you're studying prehistory, you are in exactly the right place. We're about to take a journey through millions of years of human history, all the way from our earliest ancestors to the very first civilizations. Seriously, think of this as your secret weapon for that upcoming exam. So let's dive right in.
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to figure out how we even know about a time before there were any books. Then, we'll take a look at what life was like as a hunter-gatherer. After that, we'll explore the invention of farming, which was a total game changer. We'll see how that led to the first cities, and then finally, we'll get to the invention that ended prehistory altogether, writing. And don't worry, we'll wrap it all up with a quick exam kit to make sure the most important stuff really sticks.
All right, let's kick things off with the biggest puzzle of all. How on earth do you study a time period that left behind zero written records? No diaries, no history books, not even a shopping list. It's a huge question, and we've got to answer it before we can go any further.
And really, that big puzzle boils down to this one fundamental question that people have been asking for thousands of years. It seems so simple, but the answers have come from two very, very different places.
On one side, you've got creation stories. These are really powerful narratives, things you might have heard of, like Adam and Eve, that explain our origins through faith and tradition. On the other side, you have the scientific story, which is like a giant puzzle piece pieced together from physical evidence. For our purposes here, we're going to follow the evidence.
And a massive piece of that evidence has a name: Lucy. She was discovered in Ethiopia, and her skeleton, which is over 3 million years old, was an absolute game changer. Why? Because her bones proved that our ancestors were walking on two legs way earlier than anyone had thought possible. She gives us a real, physical connection to our deep, deep past. The science that finds people like Lucy is called archaeology. And honestly, the best way to think about archaeologists is that they're basically detectives for the past. They can't interview any witnesses, right? So instead, they rely on the clues people left behind: tools, bones, pots, to piece together the story of how they lived.
And this isn't just, digging randomly with a big shovel. It's a super careful 4-step process. First, they have to figure out the right place to even look. Then, they dig incredibly slowly, sometimes with just tiny tools and brushes. Third, every single thing they find gets taken to a lab, where it's cleaned and studied. And finally, and this is probably the most important part, they write it all down and share it, so we can all learn from what they found.
So, using these detective tools of archaeology, what have we learned about life for our earliest ancestors? Well, for almost all of human existence, we're talking hundreds of thousands of years, we lived as hunter-gatherers.
Now, the most crucial word to understand here is nomadic. Hunter-gatherers were nomads. That means they didn't have permanent homes or villages. They were always on the move, following the herds of animals and the changing seasons to find their next meal. For longer than any other way of life, this was just normal. Their entire lives were tuned to the rhythm of the natural world. They made their own tools, like spears and bows, for hunting. They fished. They knew which plants, berries, and nuts were safe to eat. They lived in these small, tight-knit family groups, and everything they owned had to be something they could carry. They were amazing survivors, using every single part of an animal, right down to using the skins for clothes.
But it's so important to remember that their life wasn't just about survival. Just look at the stunning cave paintings at Lascaux in France. These show us they had a really rich inner world. They were artists. They had complex beliefs. Most scientists think these incredible paintings of bulls and horses were probably part of rituals, maybe to ask the spirits for a good hunt.
For thousands and thousands of years, life went on like this. But then, about 12,000 years ago, the single biggest change in human history happened. It was a revolution that completely reshaped humanity and set the stage for, the world we live in right now. Okay, this is a key term you absolutely have to know for your exam: the agricultural revolution. And it wasn't just about planting a few seeds. This was a total transformation of how people lived. We went from being nomads who followed their food to becoming farmers who could create their own food and stay in one place. This one change makes everything about our modern world possible.
So where did this all kick off? It started in a region in the Middle East called the Fertile Crescent. And it got that name for a good reason. It had two major rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, that would flood every year. And when the floodwaters went down, they left behind this incredibly rich, fertile soil that was just perfect for growing the world's first crops, like wheat and barley.
Okay, so once you're staying in one spot to take care of your crops, chasing wild animals all over the place for dinner becomes a real problem. The solution? Domestication. Instead of just hunting animals, people started capturing them.
keeping them in pens and breeding the ones that were the calmest or gave the most milk. Goats and sheep were some of the first, followed by cows. And just like that, you had a reliable source of meat, milk, and even wool right outside your front door. This massive shift to farming set off an incredible chain reaction. I mean, staying in one place with a steady supply of food opened up a whole world of new possibilities, and it led directly to the rise of something brand new: cities. So how did it happen? Well, it's a pretty logical chain of events. Farming was so efficient that for the first time, people had a surplus, basically more food than they needed to eat. And that surplus is the magic ingredient. Why? Because it meant that not everyone had to be a farmer anymore. Some people could specialize. They could become potters or soldiers or priests. These specialists would then trade their skills or goods for food at markets. And over time, those markets attracted more and more people, and tiny villages grew into the world's first bustling cities.
And this process gave rise to the first great civilizations, names you've definitely heard of. In Mesopotamia, that's the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the Sumerian civilization popped up, building huge cities. And along the Nile River in Africa, the very same process led to the rise of ancient Egypt, with its powerful pharaohs and those incredible pyramids.
Now, these new, complicated cities had a new kind of problem. How do you keep track of all that extra grain in the storehouse? How do you write down laws for thousands of people to follow? They needed a new piece of technology, and its invention marks the official end of the entire prehistoric era.
And that invention, of course, was writing. This is the big dividing line. Everything that came before it we call prehistory. Everything that came after we call history. The Sumerians in Mesopotamia created a wedge-shaped script called cuneiform, while the Egyptians developed their famous and beautiful hieroglyphs. For the very first time, people could permanently record things like trade deals, laws, and even their greatest stories. Okay, wow. We have covered a massive amount of time, so let's wrap this all up by boiling it down to the key concepts you'll definitely want to have in your back pocket when that exam comes around.
First up, sources. A primary source is an object or a document from the actual time period you're studying, like a hunter-gatherer's stone axe or the hieroglyphs on an Egyptian temple wall. A secondary source is something that was created later, using those primary sources for information. Your history textbook is a perfect example, and yep, even this explainer we're doing right now counts as a secondary source.
Second, how do historians organize all this time before writing? They use something called the three-age system. It's pretty straightforward. It's based on the main material people use to make your tools. The Stone Age covers that huge period of hunter-gatherers and the first farmers. Then came the Bronze Age, when people figured out how to mix metals to make stronger tools. And finally, the Iron Age brought even stronger technology, which takes us right up to the start of recorded history.
So, to wrap this all up, I want to leave you with a big question to chew on. We've seen our ancestors learn to walk upright, control fire, invent farming, and create writing. Out of all of those, which one do you think was the single most important innovation? There's really no single right answer, but thinking about it is a fantastic way to understand how each of these incredible steps built the world that we all live in today.